It was a cold night in Portland, Oregon. Rain pounded against the windows as if trying to tear away the last scraps of hope from Sarah Mitchell Eshart. The 27-year-old sat alone in her small apartment, clutching a blanket as her heart raced. Fear had become a constant visitor in her life, like a shadow that followed her day and night. Sarah had lost her father in a car accident a year earlier, and since then fear of death, of loneliness, of the future consumed her. Her job at a library offered no sense of security. Her nights were plagued by insomnia, and worst of all, the faith that once sustained her felt distant, almost extinguished. Let's pause for a moment. Have you ever faced nights where fear seemed bigger than any hope? Have you ever felt your faith slipping through your fingers? Hello, friends of Tales of Faith. I'm Elias, and I invite you to join me on this emotional journey where we'll discover how courage can be born in the darkest of moments. Sarah was at her breaking point. The news on TV was filled with stories of violence, illness, and uncertainty. Her mind spiraled, always imagining the worst. One night, staring out her window, she whispered, "God, if you're still there, show me, because I can't take this anymore." It was a desperate, tear-filled plea. What Sarah didn't know was that this simple prayer would spark an unexpected transformation. The next morning, Sarah hurried through the rain to the library where she worked. The sky was still overcast, and the cold wind seemed to cut through her coat. Her steps were heavy, weighed down by sleepless nights. As she entered the building, she noticed a man sitting near the entrance, seemingly waiting for someone. He had gray hair, a calm expression, and an open Bible in his hands. Sarah, used to avoiding strangers, averted her eyes, but couldn't help overhearing him murmur softly, "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear?" Psalm 27:1. Those simple words hit Sarah like a ray of light, piercing the darkness. She paused, pretending to adjust her bag, but really soaking in the peace in his voice. The man noticed her curious glance and, with a gentle smile, asked, "Do you like to read?" Sarah, caught off guard, stammered, "I work here, so yeah, I guess I do." He closed his Bible slowly and said, "Fear may visit us, but it doesn't have to live in us. Sometimes a single word can give us the courage we thought we'd lost." Sarah didn't know how to respond. Part of her wanted to flee the conversation, but another part felt an odd pull to hear more. Before she could stop herself, she blurted out, "What if fear is stronger than courage?" The man smiled again and said, "Then it is time to remember that courage doesn't come from the absence of fear, but from the presence of something greater than it." She stood there silent, but his words echoed in her mind all day. And you? Have you ever met someone whose simple words shifted the way you saw your life? Have you ever considered how a single encounter might be the answer to a prayer you whispered in secret? That night, in her small apartment, Sarah replayed every word the stranger had said. For the first time in months, she opened the dusty Bible on her shelf. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the pages until her eyes landed on the same verse the man had quoted. It was as if God had used that stranger to deliver a direct answer. Sarah Eshart stirred with something she hadn't felt in ages, a tiny spark of hope. She didn't know it yet, but that unexpected encounter was just the first step in a journey that would teach her the true meaning of courage. 2 days after the encounter, Sarah woke with an unfamiliar feeling. Her heart still raced as always, but there was something else. A lingering echo of the man's words. Courage doesn't come from the absence of fear, but from the presence of something greater than it. Those words felt like an invitation she wasn't sure she had the strength to accept. That morning, as she left her apartment, Sarah faced an immediate challenge. Her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, was sprawled on the building steps, struggling to get up. Sarah's first instinct was to retreat. Her anxious mind screamed, "What if I can't help? What if something worse happens? What if I make it worse?" Fear was ready to win again. But then, like a whisper, The verse came back. "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear?" With trembling hands, Sarah took a deep breath and rushed to her neighbor's side. "Are you okay, Mrs. Thompson?" she asked, her voice shaky as she helped the woman sit up. The elderly lady smiled, still catching her breath. "I tripped on the step, but thanks to you, dear, I'm not alone." Sarah's heart warmed. For the first time in ages, she had acted despite her fear. It wasn't perfect or grand, but it was real. She realized courage began there, in small acts, daily choices, and simple steps that confronted her insecurities. That day at the library, she couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. Could that small gesture be part of the answer she'd prayed for? Was the path to overcoming fear not about waiting for big miracles, but about taking small steps sustained by faith? And you? Have you ever faced something that felt impossible, but discovered that with faith, it was just the first step? Think about it. Maybe what seems overwhelming today will become the stepping stone you conquer tomorrow. That night, Sarah prayed again. It wasn't a long prayer, but it was heartfelt. "Lord, thank you for giving me strength to act today. Even with fear, I want to keep walking." When she finished, she felt a peace she hadn't known in months. Little did she know, new challenges were on the horizon. Fear would knock again, but Sarah was no longer the same. The following week, Sarah arrived at the library amidst a chaotic day. A fierce storm was battering Portland, leaving the hallways quieter than usual. Around noon, a group of students burst in, soaked from the rain and laughing loudly. Among them was Emily, a young woman Sarah had seen before. But that afternoon, something was off. Emily wasn't smiling. She clutched her arm tightly, clearly in pain but trying to hide it. Sarah watched from a distance, feeling the familiar internal tug of war. Her heart urged, "Go to her, offer help." But fear shouted louder. "What if she rejects you? What if you say the wrong thing? What if you make it worse?" It was always like this. Fear painted catastrophic scenarios, stifling any action. For a few minutes, Sarah busied herself organizing books, pretending not to notice. Then Emily dropped her backpack, letting out a small whimper of pain. In that moment, the man's words echoed powerfully. Courage doesn't come from the absence of fear, but from the presence of something greater than it. Sarah took a deep breath, walked over, and softly asked, "Are you okay?" Emily hesitated, but finally showed her arm, swollen and red. "I think I fell off my bike yesterday, but I didn't say anything so I wouldn't worry my mom." Sarah felt fear tighten her chest, but she also sensed something greater, a chance to be a light in the darkness. "You need to see a doctor," she said firmly. "I can go with you if you want." Emily looked at her, surprised, her eyes welling up. "You'd do that for me?" Sarah swallowed hard. Inside, fear screamed, but faith whispered louder. "Yes." As they walked toward the exit together, Sarah realized something extraordinary was happening. Each step beside Emily was a silent victory over fear. It wasn't about physical strength or innate bravery, but about trusting God was with her in every detail. And you? Have you ever felt God place someone in your path not just for you to help them, but for you to overcome your own fears? That simple act would change more than Sarah could imagine. By helping Emily, she wasn't just facing fear, she was learning that courage blooms when we choose to love, even while trembling inside. After that rainy day, Sarah's routine shifted. Emily, the student she'd helped, started showing up at the library more often, not just to study, but to talk. Their conversations began as short, shy exchanges, but soon grew into long, laughter-filled moments of shared stories. Sarah, who had felt alone for months, discovered that friendship could be a bridge to reclaiming her hope. One afternoon, as they organized books together, Emily said sincerely, "Sarah, I've never met anyone as patient and kind as you. I really needed someone to show me there are still good people in the world." Those words hit Sarah deeply. The fear that had always paralyzed her was giving way to something new. The realization that, even in her fragility, she could be a vessel of love and kindness. But it also scared her. What if I let her down? What if I'm not strong enough to keep helping? That night, alone in her apartment, Sarah reflected on everything. Fear still lingered, whispering she wasn't enough. But now there was also the gentle voice of faith, reminding her that her courage came from God, not her own strength. And you? Have you ever felt torn between believing in your weaknesses and trusting that a greater strength guides your steps? Her friendship with Emily grew quickly, but with it came a new challenge. One day, Emily arrived at the library with red, tear-streaked eyes. Concerned, Sarah asked what was wrong. Emily hesitated but finally confessed, "My mom's sick, and the doctors say the treatment's expensive. I'm so scared of losing her, Sarah." Sarah's heart raced. That pain was all too familiar. She too had lost someone she loved deeply and knew the weight of feeling powerless. Fear tried to take over again. "You can't handle this. It's too much. Run, like you always have." But instead of running, Sarah took a deep breath, grabbed Emily's hand and said, "You're not alone. We'll get through this together." In that moment, Sarah realized something powerful. Courage wasn't just about facing her own fears, but about carrying others' burdens. Trusting God would sustain her. The days that followed were heavy for Sarah and Emily. Emily's mother, Mrs. Carter, had been diagnosed with a serious heart condition, and the doctors warned of the urgent need for surgery. The cost was high, and the uncertainties even greater. Sarah, who knew the bitter taste of loss, felt fear creep back into her chest like a persistent shadow. One night after visiting Emily at the hospital, Sarah returned home exhausted. Collapsing onto her couch, tears streamed down her face. "I can't go through this again, Lord. I can't lose another person I love." Fear screamed, urging her to pull away, to protect herself from pain before it was too late. But as her eyes fell on the open Bible on her coffee table, they landed on a verse that seemed written just for that moment. "So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." Isaiah 41:10. Sarah closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Maybe it wasn't about escaping pain, but about trusting God was with her, even in fear. The next day, seeing Emily break down in tears in the hospital corridor, Sarah felt the urge to hug her. "Emily, I know you're scared, I am too, but we're not alone. Let's pray for your mom together." Emily looked at her, surprised, and through tears nodded. There, hand in hand, in a hospital full of uncertainty, two women lifted their voices in prayer. And you? If you were in their place with a loved one's life at risk, what would you do? Would you flee from fear or choose to trust, even without guarantees? In that moment, Sarah realized courage wasn't the absence of tears, but the decision to stand firm when everything around her seemed to crumble. That night, a new calling stirred within her, to stay by Emily's side until the end, no matter the cost. What Sarah did not know was that this choice would lead her to face the greatest test of her faith yet. The morning of the surgery arrived with a heavy silence in Portland. The hospital buzzed with activity, but for Sarah and Emily, time seemed frozen. Every second ticked like a hammer in their hearts. Mrs. Carter, lying on the gurney, gave her daughter a tender smile before being wheeled into the operating room. "It'll be okay, sweetheart. Trust in God," she said with a calm that seemed impossible given the gravity of the situation. Emily, however, was in tears. Sarah stayed by her side, fear coursing through her own veins. The hospital, the smell of disinfectant, the hurried doctors, it all brought back painful memories of the day she lost her father. Her body screamed to run, but her soul whispered, "Stay, don't run this time." The hours dragged on endlessly. Emily paced the corridor while Sarah tried to stay calm. At one point, Emily collapsed to her knees on the cold floor, sobbing. "I can't lose my mum, Sarah. I can't." Sarah knelt beside her, tears in her own eyes, and said, "Emily, I know what this pain feels like, and for so long fear paralyzed me. But today I've learned something. Courage isn't about not feeling fear. It is about holding tight to God's hand even when everything inside you screams to give up." They embraced, crying together, until Sarah, for the first time in months, raised her voice in a bold prayer. "Lord, we place Mrs. Carter's life in your hands. Give us courage to trust, even when we have no guarantees." And you? If you were in that hospital corridor with a loved one in surgery, could you pray, or would fear silence your faith? Time seemed endless, but after long hours, the doctor finally appeared. His face was serious but carried a faint smile. The surgery was a success. Now we wait for recovery. Emily collapsed in tears of relief, hugging the doctor and then Sarah. Sarah's heart raced, not with fear this time, but with gratitude. There, in the middle of the hospital, she realized she'd taken one of the biggest steps of courage in her life. She had stayed. But this victory didn't mean the road would be easy. Mrs. Carter's recovery would bring new challenges, and Sarah would still face the echoes of fear that refused to let go. The first days after the surgery were filled with relief. Emily could finally breathe, and Sarah, for the first time in a long while, felt part of something bigger than her fears. But the journey wasn't free of storms. One night, while visiting Mrs. Carter's hospital room, Sarah found her groaning in pain. Monitors beeped frantically and nurses rushed in and out. Sarah's heart raced. Panic hit her like a tidal wave, dragging up memories of the night her father died. The machines, the sounds, the serious faces of the doctors, it was like a cruel mirror of the past. Her mind screamed, "It's happening again. You can't handle this. Run before it's too late." Her legs trembled. For a moment she considered bolting from the hospital, retreating to the silence of her apartment, where she could cry alone. But before she could take a step back, Emily's hand gripped hers tightly. "Sarah, please stay with me. I can't do this alone." In that instant, the battle within her peaked. Fear was real, tangible, but so was the trust Emily placed in her. Sarah closed her eyes and whispered in her mind, "Lord, I have no strength, but if you're with me, help me stay." Then, as if something held her up from within, she stood firm. She took a deep breath, squeezed Emily's hand and said, "We're not giving up now." Minutes later, the doctors stabilized Mrs. Carter. The crisis had passed. Emily cried in relief, and Sarah, still trembling, felt tears roll down her face, not just from fear, but from victory. She had stayed when everything inside her wanted to run. And you? Have you faced a moment when your mind screamed to give up, but something greater in your heart said, "Stand firm"? That night, back in her apartment, Sarah fell to her knees in her living room. "Thank you, Lord. I still feel fear, but today I realized courage isn't about not trembling. It's about staying even while trembling." That prayer became the foundation for a new chapter in her life. From then on, Sarah wouldn't just face her own fears. She'd be called to be courage for others lost in darkness. Weeks passed, and Mrs. Carter's recovery progressed slowly but steadily. Emily, more at ease, couldn't stop thanking Sarah. But what Sarah didn't expect was that others would start noticing the change in her life. At the library, where she'd always blended into the background, a co-worker named Daniel watched her with curiosity. He knew her as the shy young woman who could barely hold a conversation without shrinking. But lately, Sarah seemed different. There was a strength in her posture, a light in her eyes. One day, during a break, Daniel approached her. "Sarah, can I ask you something?" She smiled, a bit awkwardly. "Sure. I've noticed you've changed. You used to seem scared, closed off. Now, I don't know. It's like you found some kind of strength. What happened? Sarah hesitated. Sharing her story meant opening her heart, something she'd long feared. But then she realized this might be the next step of courage she needed to take. "I still have fear, Daniel," she said, looking down briefly, "but I've learned I don't have to face it alone. When I choose to trust God, even while trembling, I find strength to keep going." Daniel went quiet, absorbing her words. "You know, I've been fighting my own battles. Maybe I need that kind of faith." Sarah's heart warmed. For the first time, she saw that her personal struggle with fear wasn't just about her. It was about touching other lives. "And you? Have you ever thought that your pain, your victories, and even your scars might be the hope someone else needs?" That night, walking home under Portland's starry sky, Sarah felt something new. Fear lingered like a faint shadow, but it no longer ruled her. A conviction grew within her that her life had purpose. And in that moment, a bold idea sparked to share her story more widely, not just with Emily or Daniel, but with everyone trapped by fear, like she once was. The thought was terrifying for someone who'd always lived in silence. But deep down, Sarah knew this might be God's calling for her life. The idea of sharing her story grew in Sarah like a flame she couldn't extinguish. Emily and Daniel encouraged her. "Sarah, you need to tell more people what God's done in your life. Your courage could change lives." But the more she thought about it, the tighter fear gripped her chest. What if they laugh at me? What if they think my story's too small? What if I freeze in front of everyone? She, who always preferred silence, now faced an inner call to speak. One Sunday, Emily invited her to church. Sarah hadn't attended a service in months, not since losing her father, but she agreed to go. When she arrived, she was stunned. The pastor, tipped off by Emily, asked her to share a brief testimony. Sarah's heart pounded as if it might burst. Her hands sweated and the urge to run nearly overwhelmed her. Yet as she climbed the steps to the pulpit and faced the congregation, something unexpected happened. Among the dozens of faces, she saw Emily smiling, Daniel waving subtly, and for a moment she felt as if God himself were beside her, whispering, "Do not fear, for I am with you." Her voice trembled at first. "My name is Sarah Mitchell, and for a long time I lived ruled by fear. I thought I'd never be free of it, but I learned that courage isn't about not feeling fear. It's about trusting God and taking a step even while trembling." The words flowed, each one lifting a weight from her chest. She spoke of the night she cried out to God in despair, the encounter with the man at the library, her friendship with Emily, and the night she stayed at the hospital. When she finished, the silence was followed by gentle applause. Not showy, but grateful. Some wiped away tears. Sarah could hardly believe what she'd just done. "And you? Have you ever faced the fear of opening up and found that your vulnerability was the strength someone else needed to hear?" In that moment, Sarah realized her testimony wasn't just about her struggle. It was about the courage that blooms when we let God use even our greatest weaknesses to inspire others. But this victory wasn't the end of her journey. A new obstacle would soon arise, demanding more faith and courage than she ever imagined. Days after her testimony at church, Sarah walked the streets of Portland with a lightness she hadn't felt in years. Each step seemed upheld by a new strength, but life, with its unexpected twists, had another test in store. One afternoon, as she arrived at the library, her phone rang. It was her mother, her voice heavy with worry. "Sarah, the doctors found something in my tests. I'll need more exams." Sarah's legs went weak, as if the ground had vanished beneath her. Her heart raced, and the old shadow, fear of loss, swallowed her whole. "Not again. I can't go through this again." That night, alone in her apartment, Sarah felt the same anguish that had haunted her after her father's death. The faith that had blossomed seemed to waver at the thought of losing another loved one. In tears, she fell to her knees. God, please don't let this happen. I don't know if I can handle it. The room was silent, but in her heart, she recalled a truth she'd heard so many times. Courage isn't the absence of fear, but the choice to trust, even in uncertainty. In the days that followed, as they awaited further tests, Sarah realized this trial was different. When she helped Emily, she was strengthening someone else. Now, it was her own family, her own story, on the line. Emily stood by her, echoing Sarah's own words. Sarah, you told me courage is staying, even while trembling. Now it's your turn to live that again. And you? Have you ever found yourself facing the very advice you gave others, tested by it? How did you respond? Sarah took a deep breath. She knew she couldn't run or let fear decide for her. Even if the news was bad, even if the future was uncertain, she would choose to stay. And in that surrender, she realized the greatest act of courage wasn't fighting fear itself, but continuing to trust God, even without guarantees. The morning of the results arrived with an overcast sky in Portland. Sarah accompanied her mother to the doctor's office, her heart pounding so hard it seemed to echo through the halls. Each step was heavy, and fear, like an old enemy, whispered, "Prepare for the worst." Seated in the office, they waited in silence until the doctor entered, papers in hand. He sat down, took a deep breath, and began. "Mrs. Mitchell, the tests showed something that initially seemed concerning, but after detailed analysis, it's not malignant. It's a condition that can be managed with regular medical care and lifestyle changes." For a moment, the world stopped. Sarah looked at her mother, whose eyes were brimming with tears, and then her own tears fell. They weren't tears of despair, but of relief. The fear that had gripped every second of those days was replaced by gratitude so intense, Sarah couldn't contain it. Outside the office, she hugged her mother tightly. "I thought I couldn't handle it, but God carried us through," she said through tears. That experience became the final piece of her journey's puzzle. Sarah finally understood. Courage isn't a gift reserved for the strong, but a daily choice to trust God, even when fear screams louder. That night, back at her church, Sarah shared her story again. She spoke of losses, nights of fear, unexpected encounters, friendships forged and faith that bloomed. As she finished, she said with a steady voice, "The courage that overcame fear didn't come from me. It came from God, who was with me in every step, every tear, every moment of silence. And you, today, in the midst of your battles, will you listen to fear's voice or hold tight to God's hand and let courage bloom?" Sarah's story reminds us of the promise in Joshua 1:9, "Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go." Like Sarah discovered, true courage doesn't mean the absence of fear, but trust in a God who never abandons us. Another powerful verse is Isaiah 41:10. "So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." Courage is born from the certainty that we don't walk alone. Lord, thank you for surrounding us with your love and strength, even in the midst of fear. Help us remember that true courage comes from trusting you, not our own strength. May we face every challenge with faith and hope, knowing we're never alone. Amen. Friends of Tales of Faith, may this story strengthen your faith. Share in the comments what you'd do if it were you. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and share this video to inspire more people. Until the next episode, God bless you.